an idea is not for sale?
For me, I don't want to sell it to anybody. I just put out there what I'm doing and attract people who are like-minded and see the possibility. I think eventually the idea gets big enough that you do have to sell it, but in the beginning I would run like crazy from anybody who wants me to convince them.
And I wanted to become an actor, but that was in 1983, so you can imagine my English at that time. So I couldn't do any Shakespeare, Tennessee Williams, nobody could understand me. So my friends told me, Jacques, why don't you come and take some dance class? I said, you don't have to speak. And suddenly I fell in love with movement, the power of movement, and that's how everything started.
Judgment, good judgment, sometimes requires distinguishing what we can do from what we can't do. And it's silly to knock our heads against the wall.
If I'm kind of bored, if I've run out of steam on a current idea, I look for something that people are irrationally passionate about. Like there's no rational explanation for why people are so excited. I don't try and break rules. I might kind of ignore rules that I don't feel are relevant, but I actually love rules because the thing about rules is they define a possibility space, and then you can explore every square inch of that space, and particularly the kind of outlier, like the margins of the space, that a lot of people don't go to because it's like, that's the rule, and we don't want to get too close to breaking the rule.
Some of the great ideas are really developed through kind of spontaneous creativity, and it's more about how you arrange different thoughts together, how you make a chain of thoughts, more than the inspiration. And I think actually creativity is something that doesn't really exist. You know, creativity is something that everyone has. When you work in dance, there's a code. You can break the rules, make new rules, or you can work very well in those rules. So you can become a great ballet dancer if you do accomplish those rules perfectly and you do it perfectly, or you can break the rules and learn how to play with objects and with dance and looking at people dance in the streets and make a completely new, fascinating story out of it.
So yeah, sometimes when I'm looking for ideas, I don't even look for an idea, I just pick something randomly and then try and see if it could fit. The idea is sort of, instead of trying to figure out the right thing, you just pick anything and then hack it and interpret it and use the constraints of that arbitrariness to think of something more interesting than you would have thought on your own.
So, I mean, I'm not really focusing on do I break the rules or I don't. But it's interesting about the idea of failure because about breaking the rules, I like to put myself in a position of failure. If I feel I can fail, because I love that aspect, because right behind failure is discovery, is success.
One of the best pieces of advice I ever got was that you should put yourself in an area of extreme probability of failure, because it's the only space that breakthroughs will be made, because until the day that they're made, every breakthrough seems stupid and impossible and a waste of time.
This may be a third possibility. It's not so much breaking the rule as choosing to ignore it for the purpose of doing a what-if thought experiment. I think that to the extent that we are afraid of failure, we're guaranteed to fail. So you have to sort of have a sense of humor and a sense of humility that, look, these issues are very difficult. People a lot smarter than you have thought a lot harder than you have. You may have a small contribution to make, but don't be afraid that you're going to fail miserably.
How do we take this kind of freewheeling kind of thought process that you all have and move that into a more structured business environment, in particular, say, the automobile truck industry, the energy industry, how to maintain our standard of living but get us away from an incredibly heavy dependence on fossil fuels.
If you talk about commercial issues, it's not so much of having the great idea that will change the world in one day. So the great ideas that came, took 20, 30, 40 years to become a product. And most of the times, it's not because the industry is not quick enough, because it is simply because the industry doesn't have the interest to use that idea. In France, you probably go to Paris, and there's a wonderful car in a museum. It's a car that was developed 15 years ago by Renault. It's a car that with 1 liter of gas does 100 kilometers. 1 liter of gas, 100 kilometers. It's in a museum since 15 years. We had the technology to do it 15 years ago.
If you define the problem like a game, it exposes all of these pockets that people might be thinking about and can be approached from sort of different angles. So we're trying to use a game environment combined with sort of mass collaboration, crowdsourcing platforms online to allow for industry professionals as well as members of the public, researchers, school kids, everybody to brainstorm on that.
Each of you can maybe go back and say how collaboration has contributed.
I like to create a team, but I like to also to create also a family and how we respond to one another and how we communicate to one another, because that idea of family is important and how we can trust one another. That idea of teamwork for me is usually important.
You know, I'll start out thinking this problem will be solved well by a game, and I start making prototypes and I don't like it, and I think, okay, no, I've learned that a game is not a viable solution for this problem, for now at least not the kind of game that I'm working on. So I have no problem trying things and giving up on them. I just, you know, chalk that up to, a piece of the world that I'm not going to poke at anymore for now.
Most of the problems that I work on, I can't be confident in advance that there is a solution. And so sometimes, yes, I do give up. I give up after I have convinced myself that I've tried everything that I can for now. Maybe it's doable, but I can't do it. One of the things that I love to do with my students is to introduce a problem which can be stated succinctly and say, okay, what's the solution? And have them think for 2 or 3 days before I say, okay, that's the problem Descartes was thinking about when he wrote the Meditations. Let's look and see what his solution is. Why do I do this? In part because I like to see them get frustrated. Have an appreciation for the difficulty of the problem Descartes was solving. You don't appreciate the beauty of his answer until you've tried to do a little bit of the hard work.
But it should be learning, as Sandy was saying, how to reason about a problem, how to confront yourself to a discussion. You can also work on something that is so it's so beyond that you really believe it will be the future. But if it's way too beyond, people won't understand it. So you have to most of the time reposition your creativity in a way that it's a kind of evolution. It's not only about having the idea, but about how you set the idea into the right context. And if you want to do it, if you want to be understood, or you just care to have the best ideas possible and to go way ahead on your highway and don't really care about who's, to your audience.
I think it may be a healthy thing for us to try to articulate when we find ourselves in a situation where we're not entirely comfortable. Why is it? What's going on here? I went to college thinking I was going to be the third baseman for the New York Yankees. I see that Boston hat on, I'm not happy. There was a class I had my sophomore year. It wasn't even a philosophy class. It was individualism in the novel. She used to invite us to her house on Thursday nights, and we would have wine and discuss the books. And I remember thinking one day, this is what I want to do with my life. It can't get better than that.
So I started writing about architecture and I became a journalist. But then journalist was writing an article. I was working first in a weekly, so every week having a new idea. So that's heavy, I swear.
Typically don't conclude that I have an idea until I can put some structure on it. The reason is what I call false aha moments. One of the things that I have tried to train myself to do is not to get overly excited until I've actually articulated it quite a lot, and it has quite a lot of structure.
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think there's a lot of glory associated with, big ideas, but I'm kind of more interested in things that work. I usually email somebody that I think will give me good feedback, and then I Google desktop archive search for conversations that I've had when I finally come around to, I send someone an email about an idea for a thing, and then I go back and see what I wrote, and because you're not always ready to capitalize on every idea that you have when you have it, but it helps if you articulate it, I find, to somebody else. Or I blog about it, and then I force other people to know about it. That's somehow forcing me to do something about it.
I sleep on it. It's the best way. If it's still there the morning after, it's a good idea.